time before and it went. So, whew. Here we go. It worked before.
Right. Good time for an introduction.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's Shannon again from iEvolveTV, again with Sean Black.
Hey.
I'm like watching us again in like repeat, so I should probably go back to Zoom and get myself all confused.
Yeah, that'd be a good thought.
Everybody's favorite Norse pagan shaman, right? I like that part. So we're coming again to you guys again to talk about some really cool things that we've had on our mind. Just stepping away from the current crazy stuff. And we thought we'd talk about the Norse idea of the soul.
Cool. Well, we'll talk about some parts of it. There's a lot of parts of it.
Lots of, I don't know if we want to say spiritual ideas, just their way of life, really, you know.
That's a worldview, really, you know.
Yeah.
And it wasn't shared in identical. There's no, you know, none of this is canonized in some Norse Bible somewhere. Let me stress that. But certain tribes had certain perspectives, and your ancestors may have had a very specific kind of way of looking at some things, maybe put more importance on some things rather than others, or could have seen it maybe just the way I'm going to explain it. So, but, you know, there are a few ways you can go back and find out some of this information, but I think we're going to start out by talking about the place to start on this subject is usually Orlog, because that's your primal layer. So Orlog is your everything that you inherit from your ancestors, right? It's your in this part of you, and this is in what we're talking about is a whole bunch of different parts of you, or me, or us, or whatever.
Right.
So Orlog is all the things that you inherit physically, mentally, energetically, or spiritually, if you will. And it includes things like the cycles that were real positive for your ancestors, things that they had accomplished, things that they had, you know, really victories they had in their lives. And each one of your ancestors contributes to this Orlog. So it's a growing thing. And your Hamingya is the sort of the working end of your Orlog. So that's where, you know, you're making your contributions to this encyclopedia of your people. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So we'll touch a little bit back and forth on Hamingya a little bit, but that's a whole other subject, and it's a really, you know, deep in. Go ahead.
I was raising my hand.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So for those people that are a little bit more, you may be tuning up their spiritualism, but they might have heard of the word Akashic records. So how does that like relate? Like, what is the translation?
Okay, so the way that people have described, and a lot of people have described this in a lot of different ways, right? And I don't mess with the idea very much, but this is like your Orlog is kind of like your family's book within your tribe's bookshelf, okay, within your regional or sort of ancestral section of the Akashic library.
So everything that I'm genetically connected to, their experiences, everything that I can tap into, connected to my DNA, but also connected to my heart chakra.
Yeah, depending on your skills and your tools that are available to you. I mean, you know, a DNA sequencing laboratory is certainly one of those tools, but also your consciousness is another one of those tools. And neither one of those two, really, the DNA laboratory has a lot more restriction on its capability than your consciousness.
Right.
But what it can do is it can help develop for you a context through which you can more clearly identify things by using your consciousness. So your, you know, there are tools you can use to do that, like your Vey and some other things. But primarily what we're talking about is, you know, the Orlog itself is the story you know, laid out in physiology, laid out in psychology, and also laid out in energy. So, you know, another a more physiological way to look at that could be epigenetics. This is like your epigenetic personal library, you know. And this is, again, we're talking about Orlog. So really, Orlog is kind of like the Akashic record and karma combined.
And
But
memory too, like I know Native Americans.
Yeah, blood memory is another way of calling it the epigenetic aspect of it. You know what I'm saying? And the stacks of DNA that you get, and you don't just get this Orlog from your ancestors. Okay, it's not just your DNA. That's
that's what I was trying to say.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good place to start with understanding what it is. But you also get it from the you know, the 50% of your DNA or so that is from viruses is essentially from the spirits of the land around you. Okay. And everywhere you've been, everywhere you pick those up, they come into your DNA and provide you a whole bunch of information within your DNA, mitochondrial DNA and others. So what you're looking at is your Orlog is a representation of everything that you are. But it's, you know, it's about half where you are, okay, physiologically. And if we understand the law of correspondence, then we understand that the things that we are physiological, we are also mentally, and we are also energetically. So given that understanding, it's critical as a result that you understand the importance of animism as well as ancestor veneration, and how they are both part of you. And those are both pillars of paganism. And so what we're starting to understand is that our pagan ancestors had a natural understanding and acceptance of the world around them that was to a much higher degree than we've experienced, you know, at least in Northern European tribes in the last 700, 800, maybe 900 years, maybe 1,000 in some cases, depends. There were some stalwart holdouts, I think, up in Finland that hung on to their understanding of reality for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and I know you like to start there because that's stuff that people can like almost kind of touch, you know.
Yeah, it's like tangible. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, because I can sit here and I can tell you, okay, we're going to talk about, you know, Norse paganism, and we're going to talk about ancestor veneration and animism. And you already have these predisposed notions of what that means without understanding that there's a scientific physiological backup for what we're talking about, as well as a historic archaeological backup. And neither one of those things had really have much to do with the way that it doesn't have a lot to do with turning our mythology, which is different than our spirituality, into a religion, which is also different than our spirituality. Right. So it's not a religion, and it's not, it's a worldview, more or less, you know. It's not a religion, and it's not mythology. It's a different thing. As a matter of fact, it's really important to understand that the gods are secondary to all this, you know. Like, this is the stuff you have to understand. And if you understand this, then you understand the context of the mythology that will help you understand more about these spirits that our ancestors didn't even call gods until they met Christians, you know. Like, they didn't even call them God. They weren't gods. There was no real word for that. So it's like, you know, we have all these folks trying to recreate our spirituality, you know, from our tribal origins in Northern Europe. And a lot of them are failing to recognize this, but that doesn't take away from the work that they have done. You know, that does make them like, I mean, you know, there's a lot of stepping stones that have to be used in order to get to a decent expression of spirituality, especially if it's indigenous, and especially if there's no unbroken chain of custody for that way of life. So everybody who's contributing is doing a really good job, I think. I just, you know, we just got to keep moving forward is all.
Like, there's a difference between like in Germany, they said Odin was Woden, right? They probably didn't say Woden, but it started with a W.
Yeah.
So that's where we got, you know, Wednesday.
Right. And that was an even different translation of it, which was, transliteration actually, but it was Whedon and Woden. And, you know, and if you're pronouncing it, it's like, you know, I'm not an expert in these pronunciations, but the folks to talk about are the folks to go research. Yeah, those some folks that really do understand this stuff, like Dr. Jackson Crawford. He's my hero on the linguistic side of all this.
This guy.
Yes, that guy. Yes. And that book, everybody who's watching this, go buy that book. You're going to love it, because in the back of that book is something super cool. It is the Cowboy Havamal. And it is so cool, man. I love it. I'm so glad he did that. And to come from a linguist as you know, talented as Dr. Jackson Crawford, to have him sort of translate that into something his great grandfather or grandfather might have, the way he might have worded the Havamal. I just thought it was fantastic, and it read great.
I'll have to go back there.
Yeah, yeah. For those of us that have read and understand pretty well the Havamal, looking at that version of it is just super cool, man. And it's I think it's got some real good contemporary value. I know when he talks about that, he says,
huh? I don't know if you can see this on my camera, so
not really.
Keep flashing it up there. We can't see it.
You got to hold it still long enough for the camera to adjust.
Oh, okay.
Lift it up a little bit. There you go. Down.
Down?
Yeah. There you go, right there. The Cowboy Havamal. Anyway, it's just it's a super great take on the Havamal, and I thought he did a great job. And you know, as it just shows what a fantastic teacher he is. And so if you guys don't know about him, he's got a Patreon page, and he does tons and tons of YouTube videos. I'm a patron of his. I give him $10 a month or something like that, because I just
think he doesn't scare me with his music.
No, that's Arth Harder.
My pants.
That's Arth Harder.
I know.
Right. Yeah. No, his is all his musical intro is short and sweet, and it's cool.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I'm like, wait a minute, am I watching a Western?
Wait, yeah, right. Yeah.
Did I get the wrong video?
Yeah. No, that's him. That's him.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah. Super cool though. Yeah, definitely check that out. Buy the book, become a patron, go check out his material. I mean, I can't hope to catch up to what he's teaching in there. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I'm like, I don't even look at him at what he's got some months. I just give him another $10 because he's just done so much for our community, you know?
Mm-hmm. He's good.
Like, divided out the bullshit. And there's a lot of bullshit, folks.
Like, there is. Like, I really don't particularly care to, like the book that I showed you before we went on. Like, yeah. I really don't care to have those labels.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't show those books to everybody because I'm like, I don't really want those labels. I like the content because it's just one little aspect in somebody's idea. It's, you know, it's relatable.
Well, I like Norse Pagan because it's ambiguous enough.
Yeah.
You know, it's not.
My dad says the old ways.
And that's cool. That's a good way to put it too. But, you know, it's like, to be clear, you know, different groups seem to be gravitating towards specific periods in time. Okay. Like to me, anything from the Viking period forward seems to represent the Christianization of our people. So the further forward you get from the Viking, you know, the Viking age, which ended, I think, around, I think it was maybe sort of officially ended around 1066 at the Battle of Hastings. I think that marks the end of the Viking age. I'm not sure. It's right in there somewhere. I'm not sure what event marked it, but anyway, and it goes back, you know, a couple hundred years. It's not that big a period in time, really. It's going to be the Viking age, but that seems to be where most people, you know, because they're talking about written lore and that kind of stuff, and that ain't really the lore was written by Christians, guys, and they're going to have their own
right.
You know?
Like the Poetic Edda wasn't written by a Viking,
right?
Norse. I mean, the Vikings. That was like being a Marine. So I mean, it wasn't written by one of those guys.
I think it paid a little better than being a Marine, but other than that, that's pretty much what it seems like. Right. And they were just, you know, they were clan groups and you know, and tribes and things like that banded together. Sometimes just bands of guys that have been fighting, and not just fighting though, but I mean, most of these guys were using. Before the Viking age, you know, there was a lot of trading going on, and they had trade routes that seem to have gone all the way to Istanbul and further even.
Yeah.
I was at a place where where there was Viking graveyard, as it was described to me, and I went there, and it was in a place called Amedi, which is in northern Iraq.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it was super cool. It was
You know,
badass.
I imagine though, the places in which, Christianization happened, it would
Mhm.
have happened like, it would have been a migration, so like places like, I mean, we even see that in how last names were changed, or I would say English. They weren't like, okay, so
Anglicized.
like my grandmother who would have came over here. Her name was Birgit Azel's daughter,
Uh-huh.
or Aisley's daughter. So she was named after her father's first name with
Right.
daughter. That's how they were
Right.
traditionally named.
Hmm.
So that, that's hard for our American or, Western brains to kind of wrap our heads around. But so, that's how they were. That was only 150 years ago. They don't
Yeah,
do that
and
so much
if you
anymore
think,
in Norway, but they still kind of do that more so in like Iceland.
yeah, that tradition is carried on in Iceland to a large degree. I don't know that, there's, you got to remember Catholicism was a lot more forgiving than Protestants, and the Protestant thing and the Reformation that came with them. Um, the Martin Luther movement, if you will, it just was like really devastating to the remaining
Yes.
parts of the pagan reality that existed. Just
Mhm.
about completely destroyed it. But I mean, there were steps towards the reduction of that kind of way of looking at the world. But the real big difference that people seem to miss, even in a contemporary setting, is the world denying view versus the world accepting view, right? Which is the whole reason that science and Christianity and Islam, as we know it today, have just like they're at odds, because real science is about a world accepting view. It's about observation and all those kinds of things that
Right.
scientific method and all of that. That fits perfectly with the pagan perspective, which
Mhm.
is kind of interesting. And but it completely butts heads with the Christian view. And what we're finding is that the monotheistic view was there to build empires and to control people. We're all pretty much, everybody who used to be Christian understands that.
Yeah.
And atheists understand that. All pagans understand. We all get it. Okay. So what happens when that starts to peter out a little bit? Well, you have to get science by proclamation instead of science by scientific method, which is kind of what we have now. And that's fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about this world accepting view versus this world denying view. So science by proclamation is a world denying view. It's an authoritarian world denying view. So they're telling you what they want you to know and telling you their opinions. And what are their opinions based on? Well, they can't really show you that. You can't, but and you can't say, wait a minute, I want to see some proof. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
then you're a science denier, right? So how does all that apply to Orlog? Well, it applies because we have it within our Orlog. We have some really crappy cycles, of course, but we also have some fantastic cycles. And the cycles are patterns that continue through different lifetimes within the Orlog, right? Well,
Mhm.
one of the prevailing patterns within the northern, all the northern tribes seem to have this in common, is a real high degree and high value for personal freedom. Okay, so that's still within our Orlog, and it's so strong within our Orlog that we have things like the Magna Carta, the Constitution of the United States of America, for example. These
Mhm.
documents were made by folks who were connected to this Orlog, right? The
Yes.
larger version of it, the one that's beyond family, beyond tribe, the bigger sort of collective consciousness of Northern Europeans. So, yeah. And so when that stuff starts to get impinged upon, it stirs something really deep in all of us, even when it's not us that's the victim of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Right? Like, and we can talk about, whenever I say something like that, immediately the first thing that pops up is somebody talks about, slavery. Well, slavery in Northern Europe was not the same as slavery in other parts of the world.
Right.
We had something called thraldom, and that was essentially you lived somewhere and did what you were told until you either showed interest in the responsibility or showed the capability of being able to take care of yourself and be a contributor to your to your clan or your tribe or your community or your village or something. And at that point, when you understood enough about how things were going on, you understood enough about the language, enough about a skill that you had to offer or whatever, then you were not a thrall anymore. Then you were a free man, and you could vote at the all thing, and you could do all these different things. And there were different versions of that. Those are Norse words that I'm using, but the Germanic tribes had those same kinds of circumstances. So did many of the Celtic. I think most of the Celtic tribes did things the same way too.
They did.
So yeah. I haven't read everything there is.
I checked my Orlog.
Right.
Because I've got a bit of all of that in me. So.
Yeah, me too. This armband I wear those are Celtic wolves. Those aren't Norse wolves. You know what I'm saying? There's a reason for that. And the wolf and the snake has to do with, those are the two most, from my Orlog, the wolf and the snake represent the magic of the unseen world, or their version of quantum physics, if you will. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Right? Because that's really what it is.
Yeah, you mean the snake does?
Well, no, I mean what they represent in depth. When you understand the representation of the snake and the wolf, they represent the the world around us that is more than just axes, ale, and pigs.
Yeah. Well, if you're somebody that studies energy and energy of the body, like when you say snake, I immediately go to the American or American Medical Association and the Kundalini and the chakras, and my head will immediately goes
Caduceus. Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the Book of Genesis.
Genesis, right. Because that's true verbatim, just like all the other written material is true verbatim,
right.
Like the Quran, like the Eddas,
right. Very true. Very true. So I did have a question for you. Now I forgot what it was.
It'll come back around.
It will. It'll come back around. Oh, I'm going to say it wrong. My Mjolnir has Celtic knots on it. It's tiny.
Right. I don't think that there's anything even strange about that. As we learn more about how to understand and map genetics, that gives us a lot of details that made a lot of sense about, cultural intermarrying and all that kind of stuff. And, that's what you do if you have a tribe. Otherwise, you have a family line that looks like a beanpole, and your folks ain't going to make it. Yeah. So the tribes that made it,
funny-looking kids.
Yeah, the tribes that made it understood this shit, and and so the whole idea of of anything less than genetic syncretism is kind of wrong. I mean, there's no real like, how would you put it, like sacred line of people. There's no genetic profile that is very specifically that this makes you this and this makes you that. It really doesn't work out that way. And when we follow things like the ancient migrations of even, we have genetic information about the folks that were migrating around the time of the last ice age. And how does that fit into everything? You know what I'm saying? And they're showing how it does. And some people don't want to see that. We call those people Christians,
Well, we know that because it shows up in their words, or our words, or their words, or
linguistics linguistics are a fantastic way to show this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those words are called cognates, by the way. And where it's the same word in multiple languages. Yeah. Those happen from like all kinds of sharing of culture. One of the most important ones is from sharing the trade routes. I mean, we're talking about folks that are not necessarily totally literate in the languages that they're working with, if there's any literacy to be had at all. So, the more you meet, the more you talk, the more you figure out what words mean. And some words wound up being shared because they're, easier or better or whatever.
Well, or they're introducing something to a culture that didn't
Right.
exist there.
Didn't previously
And it's a
exist there.
medicine and they're trading
Right.
something.
Right. Yes.
So
Yeah.
they're going to call it that.
And that happens today too. Look at words that come out of science, for example, or come out of production, or come out of Facebook, or come out of where, you know what I'm saying? There's all kinds of words being introduced to our language that mean the same thing across all kinds of different languages. And those are called cognates. And yeah, they're a great way to show interconnection between cultures.
So we talked about Orlog and we talked about blood.
We started to, and then we got off track.
What's that?
So we started talking about Orlog and then we went off track a little bit.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So Orlog is your blood memory and it's part of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of your soul.
What you would call a soul complex. Yeah.
Soul complex. So think of a pie and that's part of your pie, but I mean,
right.
The pie like moves and shifts, or I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to consider it. Yeah. Yeah, we're heathens, so we don't have a soul. Just to be clear.
What?
Yeah, we don't have a soul. We've got something way more complex and beautiful than a soul. Which is
a being of light. Can you not tell?
That ain't a soul.
I'm all soul, baby.
Oh yeah.
I just got a skin suit. That's it.
Right. That's very, very Christian of you.
What? Anyway. Okay, so how does it relate to okay, so it's just part of the soul. So what about, how does that relate to consciousness?
Okay, so well, it gives you all the fundamental tools that you need to develop into a conscious being is really what it's about. And there's like an aspect of it that is sort of associated with rebirth is the way they usually say it in the written sources, but the written sources, like we covered what that's about. So, but there's this idea that is something like reincarnation, in that you part of your consciousness, part of who you are and what you are during this particular lifetime gets sort of passed out and spread around to those that come after you. And it's not just the way Orlog works, the way the connections in Orlog work. It's not just like your children. Okay. We're also talking about nephews, nieces, anybody that was fostered by you, any of the folks that you had long-standing interpersonal relationships with, whether it was business and trading, for example, or maybe it was people that you went to combat with, people that you went to combat against. Also, there's an intermingling of Orlog. It's like a lateral intermingling of a vertical Orlog, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It makes kind of a web, and that is one layer of a web of weird. And every generation has that inner layering, right? So your Orlog, you could consider, if we're going to talk about Orlog being something vertical that's passed down from generations through genetics, maybe, or through something like that, through children. Then you've got all these lateral things, and the lateral things, if your Hamanya is really strong, your lateral connections are going to be brilliant. There's going to be tons of them, and they're going to be very strong, very strong. And that can even rival the power of your Orlog. And
can I just interject that
sure.
The weird is your conscious reality in this dimension, just for anybody that's listening.
Well, weird is a little bit more than that. It's the whole weird is actually what I would call it strictly objective reality. That's what weird is.
Okay.
But you can see parts of weird.
That's why we say weird. Right.
Those strands that we're talking about, we can kind of see those, and that's those interconnections, that energetic, what do you call it? Consciousness, collective consciousness is built on the material weird. Like think of the whole thing as a ginormous spider web of information and records and all of those things. And the raw material that whole thing is built out of is called weird. And also the consciousness required to witness and understand in your own way, using your own creativity, that's also called weird consciousness.
I have weird consciousness.
Yeah, me too. Big time. but we don't always see it the same way. Like a masculine representation of that stuff might be a ship's rigging, okay, or a network or something like that. Whereas a feminine,
you have to weave the weird with
right, a feminine representation of that is more would have had more to do with things that women were more active in, like braiding, rope, making yarn, making rugs and blankets and stuff like that.
I don't think that I would have been a woman very often.
Yeah, maybe. I think I probably was a few times. I mean, I don't, it's, you know, I've got obviously woman ancestors, so that's, but see, what happens is that, oh, well, thank you.
Well, you know what? But I mean, I think our ancestry, I mean, everybody had, nobody cut their hair. I mean, there was just, you know.
Nah, it wouldn't really, like, it
doesn't matter.
Well, we didn't want to be Romans, and Romans, you know, when you cut when somebody gets their hair cut, that's a reduction of their personality, reduction of their identity and their autonomy.
It's so funny because when I was a kid, I got very upset when my hair got cut. It was just something in me that like got very upset. Like, right. So I don't do it anymore. Well, I try, but you know.
Well, I spent a lot of years as a Roman soldier, but as soon as I was no longer a Roman soldier anymore, you know, then I let it grow.
Yeah.
And
so people love it.
By Roman soldier, I mean U.S. Army. Okay.
That's funny.
Well, I mean, they may as well just put SPQR on your arm because you're working for the Roman Empire, man. It's like the enforcement arm of, you know, I mean, why else would we be all over the world doing all this stupid shit?
Well, I don't know that everybody gets that. That's a really big people.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, once you start connecting those dots, it's like boom, 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 boom. I mean,
right. Yeah.
But it's hard.
Sure. And I try not to, and I'm really kind of done making these conversations for the people who are just beginning in that kind of stuff. So if you hear me talking about, but in a, you know, in an interpersonal setting, like where there's a lot of people and there's feedback, if we're in front of each other, I'll go into the entire explanation and help them understand what that means. And we can go into that sometime too, but it's like we're kind of sort of like a colony that's an offshoot of whatever the Roman Empire became after it became, because that's what you do as a corporation, right? When you get busted, you change your name. So they went from the Roman Empire to the Holy Roman Empire to the Catholic Church to the you know, Catholic / Protestant Church, and you know, as long as we still got a pope, they're still an empire.
Well, somebody the other day, yesterday, asked me if I wanted to learn about how Jesus died on the cross for my sins.
You know what? It would be really cool if that was the case. If that really happened and that was really true.
I was very kind in my response.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't think he probably liked it.
What's that?
I don't think he liked it.
Did you go into the whole Jesus was a masochist thing?
No, I didn't. I just said, well, do you want to hear about how he just that Odin did it, you know, hundreds of years before? And I like just kind of did a short little blurb, and you know, would you like to hear about that? And he said, have a good day. I said, you too. That was it. There's just a story. Oh, you're frozen. Oh my God. You were talking about the Romans. Well, we'll see if he pops back on. I don't know. We'll see. And I wasn't recording this.